Imagine this. It's 2 in the morning. You're lying in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The room is completely silent, dim and heavy like a sealed vault. The only light comes from the faint glow of your phone screen, casting a pale shadow across your face. You toss and turn. It's not physical exhaustion that troubles you, but something far more elusive, an undercurrent of unease you can't quite name. You went through your day like clockwork. You woke up early, exercised, answered all your emails, stuck to your calorie count, were polite to everyone, and even read 15 pages of that personal development book. From the outside, it looks like you're winning, you're productive, in control, focused, what everyone calls disciplined. But deep inside, something feels off. Why is it that the more disciplined you become, the more a part of you feels like it's vanishing? Why is it that the more structure you impose on your life, the more hollow your nights feel? Why do you sometimes look in the mirror and wonder whether the person staring back at you is real or just a perfectly curated illusion? Is it possible that all this effort, this self-management, this rigidity, isn't growth but disappearance? Is your discipline truly a sign of strength? Or is it an armor forged out of fear? You say you're becoming better, more organized, more resilient, but for what? For whom? Have you ever asked yourself that? Is it love for yourself that drives this intensity? Or is it a kind of dread of being judged, rejected, abandoned? Are you living for excellence? Or are you simply trying to avoid failure? Are you growing? Or are you running? You wake up early not because it brings you joy, but because sleeping in would make you feel guilty. You push through your workouts not because you feel alive, but because rest makes you feel weak. You decline invitations, resist cravings, master your urges, but not because you understand them, rather because you're terrified of what they might say about you. You've turned your emotions into enemies. You've labeled desire as dangerous. You've locked spontaneity in a cage and called it discipline. What if I told you that the line between discipline and repression is far thinner than you think? That your iron will may not be the mark of an evolved self, but the mask of an unseen wound? What if this whole time you weren't really trying to become the best version of yourself, but simply trying to become someone who's easier to love? Maybe you're not climbing toward freedom. Maybe you're digging deeper into a prison of your own making. One where you are both the warden and the inmate. One where discipline is the name you give to the part of you that's been slowly erasing everything human, messy, contradictory, and alive. Think back to the moments when you were told you were too loud, too lazy, too emotional, too selfish. You were scolded, shamed, ridiculed. You learned that being too much meant being unsafe. So you shrank. You folded your edges. You taught yourself to be better. But what is better, really? Is it silence over expression, control over spontaneity, perfection over presence? What if, in trying to be disciplined, you've simply perfected your ability to reject your authentic self? You no longer feel sadness, you repress it. You no longer feel rage, you intellectualize it. You no longer feel desire, you distract yourself with goals and to-do lists and clean diets and 15-minute morning meditations. Is that discipline? Or is it an elegant form of self-abandonment? We live in a culture that worships self-control. We're told that willpower is the highest virtue. That taming the wildness within is how we become civilized. That success is just one perfectly engineered daily routine away. But no one tells you the cost. No one tells you that self-control without self-knowledge is just self-erasure. No one tells you that when you suppress something long enough, it doesn't die, it just retreats to the shadows and waits. And you feel it, don't you? That slow, gnawing sense of disconnect? That creeping doubt that no matter how good you become, it's never enough? That beneath the metrics, the habits, the achievements, something is missing? You thought you were in control, but maybe control was the first thing you lost. You thought you were growing, but maybe you were just disappearing more efficiently. You're not lazy. You're not broken. You're not undisciplined. You're just tired of pretending that becoming a machine will finally make you whole. The truth is, Self-discipline is not inherently bad. But when it becomes a weapon we wield against our emotions, our desires, our past, our humanity, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes repression. And here lies the ultimate paradox. The more you control, the less you feel. The more perfect you try to be, the more fractured you become. The more disciplined you are, the less you remember why you started this journey in the first place. So let me ask you one last thing. Who are you becoming? Really? And is that person truly free? It's time to strip away the illusion. Not to condemn discipline, but to see its shadow. To ask the question we've been avoiding all along. Are you building your life? Or are you building your cage? The real descent begins now. It's time to dive into the psychological and philosophical roots of this tension. What if the thing you're proudest of your discipline is actually the most sophisticated way you've learned to hide your pain? Let's go deeper. You feel in control. You wake up early. You exercise when others sleep. You silence cravings like swatting flies. You call it discipline. But what if the core of your discipline isn't clarity, but trauma? What if it's not growth, but a defense mechanism dressed in achievement? Let's dig into this, not as an accusation, but as a reckoning. In the language of psychology, particularly Carl Jung's analytical psychology, there exists the concept of the shadow. This shadow is everything you repress, deny, or disown about yourself. It's not inherently evil, it's just the part of you you're afraid to admit exists. Your sadness, rage, lust, laziness, your need to cry or scream or simply do nothing. Your hunger to be seen without performing, your wish to not be perfect. And here's the catch. The more intensely you try to be disciplined, the more fiercely the shadow grows beneath you. Because every act of over-control is often not mastery, but fear. You're not trying to transcend your urges, you're trying to outrun them. That's not strength. That's panic, polished and repackaged as virtue. The world doesn't reward introspection, it rewards performance. We're told from a young age that feelings are obstacles, not messages. You're told to stop crying, to behave, to not get angry, to keep your voice down, to sit still, that you must always be a good boy, a good girl, a reliable adult. But here's the truth. Before you learned to be disciplined, you learned to dissociate. You learned to suppress what made you human in exchange for praise, for acceptance, for conditional love. And when we grow up in this system, schools that value order over curiosity, families that reward obedience over emotion, workplaces that worship productivity over well-being, our very sense of self becomes entangled with how much of ourselves we can suppress. This is where philosophy enters the room, like a ghost that's been watching quietly from the corner. Friedrich Nietzsche warned us of this over a century ago. He wrote of how morality, especially the self-denying kind, often stems not from virtue, but from resentment, from fear, from the inability to face our true nature. He called it the slave morality, where people, in the face of their own powerlessness, begin to glorify restraint, obedience, humility, not because they are noble, but because they are safe, because they keep the animal within us caged. Sound familiar? You're not building discipline, you're building fences. You're not aiming for excellence, you're running from chaos. And the more you run, the more tired you become, because you're not running on energy. You're running on repression. Nietzsche had a name for the person who breaks this loop, the Übermensch, the overman, the one who accepts the whole of themselves and creates their own values not out of fear, but out of the full confrontation with reality, light and dark. But how many of us are willing to confront that darkness? Here's the hard part. Jung believed that if the shadow is not made conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. What does this mean for you? It means your discipline might not be a conscious choice. It might be a shadow-fueled compulsion. It might be a lifelong attempt to avoid the terror of being you, unfiltered. Think about it. Why is it that rest makes you anxious? Why is it that failure feels like death? Why does desire, when unfulfilled, turn into shame? Because at some level, you've come to believe that your worth is conditional. that only the edited, controlled, optimized version of you deserves love, dignity, and peace. And that belief, that subtle buried contract you made with yourself as a child or a teenager, is what drives this pathological need to perform discipline. It's not about goals. It's about survival. In trauma theory, Gabor Maté speaks of the split self, the part of us that adapts to survive, and the part of us that disappears to make room for that adaptation. We become productive instead of present. We become useful instead of honest. We become strong instead of real. That's the real cost of repressed discipline. We lose access to our true inner life. Not just the bad parts, but the wild parts, the creative parts, the free parts. The part of you that wants to dance, to scream, to stay in bed on a rainy morning. The part that doesn't need to prove anything. And yet, this loss is often invisible because we live in a culture that praises it. Society will applaud you for your restraint, but never question the wound behind it. Social media will like your morning routine post, but not your breakdown at 3 a.m. Your boss will love your work ethic, even if it's killing you from the inside. So we mistake external approval for internal health. We confuse control with peace. We confuse repression with maturity. But repression is not integration. It's not evolution. It's just exile. You're exiling parts of yourself in exchange for applause and wondering why you still feel hollow. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once said, "The greatest danger, that of losing oneself, can occur very quietly in the world, as if it were nothing at all." And that's exactly how this happens. Your identity morphs around what's acceptable. Your desires shrink to fit inside systems. Your joy fades because you've convinced yourself it's childish. Your sorrow fades because you've convinced yourself it's weakness. You no longer ask, "What do I want?" You ask, "What's the right thing to want?" You don't rest when you're tired. You rest when you've earned it. You don't cry when you're broken. You cry when no one is watching. You don't express joy randomly. You smile when there's a reason. And slowly, without ever meaning to, you become a hollowed-out version of someone who once had feelings, spontaneity, chaos, passion. That's what happens when discipline turns into doctrine, when self-control becomes self-deletion. So let's ask again, what are you really trying to control? Who are you trying not to become? And who told you that being fully human was too much to handle? This isn't about abandoning discipline. It's about unearthing its roots. Because if you don't know why you're so controlled, you'll never know what freedom truly feels like. And here's the tragedy. Many people will live their entire lives doing the right things, never realizing those things were built on fear, not love, on shame, not awareness, on control, not curiosity. But there is a different way. There is a moment when people snap, when the discipline collapses, when the structure shatters, when the shadow bursts out. And it is in that moment, messy, terrifying, beautiful, that the true work can finally begin. But only if you're ready. Only if you're brave enough to let go of being in control, long enough to see who's been controlling you all along. She was the girl everyone envied. Let's call her Anna. She was never late. Her grades were perfect. Her body was lean, her diet clean, her calendar color-coded. From the outside, Anna was a model of discipline. She posted inspiring quotes about pushing limits, owning your day, and hustling harder. People messaged her for tips on how she stayed so consistent. But Anna's private life was very different. At night, she often cried herself to sleep, though she couldn't explain why. When she skipped a workout even because of illness, she'd feel a crushing guilt that made her spiral into self-loathing. She had no close friends, not because she didn't want them, but because opening up felt unsafe. She hadn't tasted cake in 4 years. She hadn't cried in public in 6. Anna wasn't disciplined. She was imprisoned. What she called self-control was really a carefully engineered defense system built after years of being told she was only lovable when she excelled. Her straight-A report cards had once been her ticket to parental approval. Her perfect body, the shield against judgment, her packed schedule, the proof that she wasn't wasting her potential. And the scariest part? The world rewarded her for it. Anna's story is more common than we'd like to admit, because most of us live in a system that rewards suppression and calls it success. You might know someone like Anna. Or maybe you are Anna. Maybe you're the one who can't skip a day without guilt. Maybe you find comfort not in freedom, but in rules. Maybe you're not afraid of failure, but of what failure says about who you are. The consequences of this kind of repression aren't always loud. They're subtle, insidious. They wear the mask of high-functioning achievement, even as the soul withers quietly inside. So, what does a life of repressed discipline look like? Emotional anesthesia, the price of control. We numb ourselves. You tell yourself you don't have time for sadness, or anger, or loneliness. You turn feelings into tasks. If I feel anxious, I'll run 10 kilometers. If I feel sad, I'll journal it into oblivion. If I feel desire, I'll meditate it away. Over time, you begin to lose the ability to even recognize your emotions. You're so busy managing your internal world that you stop experiencing it. Take Michael, a 40-year-old corporate executive I once read about. On paper, he had it all. Career, family, savings, status. But he confessed in therapy that he hadn't felt joy in over a decade. Everything he did was out of duty, strategy, or habit. Even intimacy with his partner felt like something to check off a list. I don't know how to want anything anymore, he said. Only how to avoid disappointing people. He had mastered discipline, but he had forgotten how to feel. Body as battlefield. When discipline becomes self-violence. For many people, especially in image-obsessed cultures, discipline manifests in bodily control. Diets become rituals. Exercise becomes punishment. Rest becomes weakness. Consider the rise of disordered eating, often camouflaged under the language of health. Intermittent fasting, calorie tracking, clean eating, they're not inherently harmful. But for some, they become obsessions. Obsessions driven not by self-love, but by deep disgust. You don't eat well because you care for your body. You eat clean because you hate your body. You don't work out because it feels good. You work out because rest feels like failure. The body becomes something to conquer, to shrink, to sculpt, to dominate. And the moment it rebels, gets tired, gains weight, feels sluggish, you blame it like a disobedient child. This is not discipline. This is war. And like all wars, it leaves ruins behind. Burnout, hormonal imbalance, sleep issues, and above all, complete dissociation from your body's real needs. Repressed discipline doesn't just hurt you. It warps how you connect with others. When you live in constant self-control, vulnerability becomes dangerous. You avoid deep conversations. You avoid intimacy, not just physical, but emotional. You present a perfect version of yourself. You hide your mess, your confusion, your longings. You become a brand instead of a person. Relationships start to feel transactional. What value do I bring? Am I useful? Am I needed? But rarely, am I truly seen? Let's take David, a highly respected entrepreneur. He was admired for his discipline, his stoicism. His employees said he was inspiring. His friends called him the Rock. But when his wife left him after 12 years of marriage, she wrote him a letter. You always did the right thing, but I never felt you needed me. You never let me in. I don't know if anyone ever has. He thought discipline made him strong. But what it really did was make him unreachable. Cultural addiction to image and optimization. Now zoom out. Look at the culture we live in. Productivity apps, life hacks, 5 a.m. clubs, biohacking, cold plunges, dopamine detox, the obsession with optimizing every second of every day. But optimizing for what? We've created a culture where the ideal human is a well-oiled machine, emotionless, tireless, endlessly efficient. In such a world, rest becomes lazy. Silence becomes awkward. Depth becomes inefficient. And feelings are inconvenient. What we call grind culture is often just collective repression in disguise. We admire people who never stop, but never ask what they're running from. The shadow explodes, the rebound effect. Here's the truth you won't hear in self-help books. What you repress returns. The harder you push something down, the more violently it erupts when it finally breaks free. This is why high-functioning professionals suddenly crash, why people in peak physical condition suffer quiet mental breakdowns, why the most disciplined individuals sometimes spiral into addiction, infidelity, compulsive behavior. They weren't weak, they were compressed. The shadow, those unwanted parts of yourself, never really leaves. It waits. Until one night, you drink too much, or scream at someone you love, or have a panic attack at the gym, or sabotage your own goals for no logical reason. Not because you're broken, but because your inner world is tired of being ignored. So what's the cost of repressed discipline? A lifetime of control without connection, achievement without meaning, success without self. The scariest part? It looks so normal. No one stops you. No one intervenes. Because you're the poster child of success. But inside, something fragile is slowly cracking. So I ask you again, are you living a disciplined life? Or are you surviving a silent war with yourself? You can only hide your humanity for so long before it comes looking for you. And when it does, you'll have a choice. Break further, or begin the rebellion. Rebellion doesn't always look like fire. Sometimes it begins in silence. In the quiet moment when you finally say, I'm tired of this. Not tired in the sense of physical exhaustion, but tired of wearing the mask, tired of performing discipline, tired of suppressing every messy, contradictory, beautiful part of yourself just to be acceptable. This is the moment the rebellion begins. And no, it doesn't require you to quit your job, sell all your belongings, or move to the mountains. It begins when you stop trying to fix yourself long enough to finally feel yourself. But what does rebellion look like in a world that rewards conformity? It starts with the most counterintuitive move. Let go of the need to be better. Yes, you read that right. We live in a culture addicted to self-improvement. From morning routines to leveling up to the endless productivity porn of social media, we're constantly fed the idea that we are projects under construction. But here's the problem. If your self-discipline is built on the premise that you are not enough, no amount of success will ever heal that wound. The rebellion starts when you stop trying to become a better version of yourself and instead ask, can I sit with who I already am? Not to fix, not to optimize, but to listen. Feel before you act. Most people rush into action as a form of escape. You feel shame. You go to the gym. You feel sadness. You write it out like a to-do list. You feel anger. You take a cold shower and move on. But what if you paused? What if just once you said, I feel sad, and I'm going to let that be here. No judgment. No immediate fix. Just presence. This is radical. Because in a world addicted to action, feeling becomes a revolution. Reclaim the parts of you that you buried. In Jungian psychology, shadow work is not about destroying the darkness within, it's about integrating it. What does that mean practically? It means talking to the parts of you you've rejected. The lazy one, the chaotic one, the sensual one, the emotional one, the needy one. Ask them, what are you trying to tell me? And listen. It might sound strange, but some of the most profound inner transformations begin not with discipline, but with dialogue, with allowing the inner exiled selves to speak. One woman, after years of rigid dieting and gym obsession, finally allowed herself to eat a croissant on a park bench without guilt. She didn't just eat it, she cried. Because in that moment, she realized she wasn't hungry for food. She was hungry for permission to exist without control. That was her rebellion. Not dramatic, not loud, but deeply, soulfully human. Redefine strength. We need to shatter one of the most toxic myths of modern culture. That strength equals control. Real strength isn't about how much you can suppress. It's about how much truth you can hold without running. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison. During that time, he wasn't trying to control every inch of his environment, was cultivating presence, patience, reflection. When he emerged, his power came not from domination, but from integrity. That's real strength. Not the man who never cries, but the one who can hold space for grief and still act with clarity. Not the woman who never breaks, but the one who breaks open and becomes more whole because of it. Create sacred space for the unproductive. The system has trained you to believe that if you're not producing, you're wasting time. This is a lie. Some of your deepest healing will happen when you're doing nothing measurable. So take a walk with no podcast in your ears. Lie in bed without a plan. Watch the clouds like you used to as a child. Paint something ugly. Write something angry. Nap. Breathe. Be. This isn't laziness. It's soul maintenance. Follow the example of those who broke the pattern. You're not the first to feel this tension. You won't be the last, but some have walked through it and left markers on the trail. Franz Kafka was a disciplined legal clerk by day, but by night, he poured his torment, contradiction, and existential angst into stories that felt more real than the real world. He didn't fix himself. He channeled himself. Frida Kahlo, crushed by physical pain, painted her suffering raw and unapologetically. Her self-discipline wasn't in denying the pain, it was in allowing it to become her art, her rebellion, her truth. Carl Jung, once a model psychiatrist under Freud's theory, broke off and followed the terrifying journey inward. He painted his dreams, listened to voices within, and dared to say, the self isn't just light, it's shadow too. These weren't saints, they were rebels. Not because they shouted, but because they listened deeply. You can too. Yes, you read that right. We live in a culture addicted to self-improvement. From morning routines to leveling up to the endless productivity porn of social media, we're constantly fed the idea that we are projects under construction. But here's the problem. If your self-discipline is built on the premise that you are not enough, no amount of success will ever heal that wound. The rebellion starts when you stop trying to become a better version of yourself and instead ask, can I sit with who I already am? Not to fix, not to optimize, but to listen. Feel before you act. Most people rush into action as a form of escape. You feel shame. You go to the gym. You feel sadness. You write it out like a to-do list. You feel anger. You take a cold shower and move on. But what if you paused? What if just once you said, I feel sad, and I'm going to let that be here. No judgment. No immediate fix. Just presence. This is radical. Because in a world addicted to action, feeling becomes a revolution. Reclaim the parts of you that you buried. In Jungian psychology, shadow work is not about destroying the darkness within, it's about integrating it. What does that mean practically? It means talking to the parts of you you've rejected. The lazy one, the chaotic one, the sensual one, the emotional one, the needy one. Ask them, what are you trying to tell me? And listen. It might sound strange, but some of the most profound inner transformations begin not with discipline, but with dialogue, with allowing the inner exiled selves to speak. One woman, after years of rigid dieting and gym obsession, finally allowed herself to eat a croissant on a park bench without guilt. She didn't just eat it, she cried. Because in that moment, she realized she wasn't hungry for food. She was hungry for permission to exist without control. That was her rebellion. Not dramatic, not loud, but deeply, soulfully human. Redefine strength. We need to shatter one of the most toxic myths of modern culture. That strength equals control. Real strength isn't about how much you can suppress. It's about how much truth you can hold without running. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison. During that time, he wasn't trying to control every inch of his environment, was cultivating presence, patience, reflection. When he emerged, his power came not from domination, but from integrity. That's real strength. Not the man who never cries, but the one who can hold space for grief and still act with clarity. Not the woman who never breaks, but the one who breaks open and becomes more whole because of it. Create sacred space for the unproductive. The system has trained you to believe that if you're not producing, you're wasting time. This is a lie. Some of your deepest healing will happen when you're doing nothing measurable. So take a walk with no podcast in your ears. Lie in bed without a plan. Watch the clouds like you used to as a child. Paint something ugly. Write something angry. Nap. Breathe. Be. This isn't laziness. It's soul maintenance. Follow the example of those who broke the pattern. You're not the first to feel this tension. You won't be the last, but some have walked through it and left markers on the trail. Franz Kafka was a disciplined legal clerk by day, but by night, he poured his torment, contradiction, and existential angst into stories that felt more real than the real world. He didn't fix himself. He channeled himself. Frida Kahlo, crushed by physical pain, painted her suffering raw and unapologetically. Her self-discipline wasn't in denying the pain, it was in allowing it to become her art, her rebellion, her truth. Carl Jung, once a model psychiatrist under Freud's theory, broke off and followed the terrifying journey inward. He painted his dreams, listened to voices within, and dared to say, the self isn't just light, it's shadow too. These weren't saints, they were rebels. Not because they shouted, but because they listened deeply. You can too. Story 3. The Letter on the Kitchen Table. Now David, a startup icon who wore 16-hour workdays like medals. Investors adored him. Employees called him The Rock. One Friday, he arrived home to silence and a handwritten note. You always do everything right, yet I never feel you need me. I love you, but I can't reach you. Perfection had made him bulletproof and untouchable. Move 4. Practice raw statements. No disclaimer. With one trusted person, say a single, honest sentence. Today I feel small. Full stop. No, but I'll bounce back. Naked honesty feels risky. That's precisely why it creates connection. Move 5. Try a not-to-do list. Choose one day and list 3 things you won't do. Check KPIs, track macros, answer 11 p.m. emails. Watch what collapses, anxiety, and what blooms, clarity. Deleting the noise reveals the handful of commitments your heart genuinely wants to keep. Ultimate insight. Discipline was never meant to earn you love. It was designed to free bandwidth so you can love and be loved better. A 5 a.m. alarm rings like poetry when it rises from excitement. It feels like a whip when it rises from fear. The difference hides inside one simple question. Am I driven by affection or avoidance? When discipline flows from truth, it grants leverage more energy, steadier focus, deeper presence. When it flows from trauma, it demands sacrifice joy first, creativity next, intimacy last. Imagine a life where your anxious part, jealous part, lazy part, and visionary part sit at the same table. Not anarchy, but integration. Structure still exists, yet it bends to accommodate weather, mood, surprise. You can sprint because you love the wind, not because you fear being caught. You can rest because your worth never lived in the stopwatch. Closing invitation. Pick one move right now. Shadow letter, useless hour, metric to sensation, raw statement, or not-to-do list. Whichever whispers yes inside your chest is the right doorway. Try it today and notice what shifts. Then tell someone, friend, partner, comment section, journal, because courage multiplies when spoken aloud. Remember, the point is not to abandon discipline, but to reclaim it. Use it the way a gardener uses a trellis, not the way a jailer wields a chain. Discipline, reimagined, is simply the art of giving your full self room to breathe and then choosing, from that wholeness, where to walk next.